All right, great. All right, so I'm live. That's great to see. I'm gonna just adjust this, make sure that everything's going well on the YouTube channel once it pops up. But besides that, we'll just get right. There we go. All right. So thanks for joining me this Saturday. Today we're going to be talking about an American Catholic or American Catholics living in a Protestant atheist country. So as you probably know, America is founded on a lot of things. And so one of those things primarily is Protestantism. So the understanding of um, applying a country, living in a country that isn't under a state rule, but is like almost free thinking. And 200 years later, what do we have? Like we have the state that we live in today. So is that an accident? Is that something that's okay? Sorry. Just hey, James. I know a lot about this subject, so it'll be interesting to see someone else's take on it. So primarily, I'm going to be talking about it from the standpoint of a conversation I had on the 4th of July, because obviously the 4th of July is Independence Day. And so we were talking about tradition. We were talking about tradition in the Catholic Church. We were talking about tradition from being Americans. So our traditions as Americans, what we do, and how when we look at the Catholic landscape, when we look at how people practice the Catholic faith, how much of an influence comes from atheism and from Protestantism. And so the question, just to address this, the reason why I'm bringing in Protestantism and atheism is because atheism is, as you know, is on the rise. So I'll show this. Let's see if there we go. Atheism is on the rise. We're seeing about 28% of U.S. adults now are religiously unaffiliated, according to Pew Research. I don't think they got the wording of that wrong. So in case anybody wants to question that, as a hat tip to their Eucharistic question they had in 2019. So associating yourself as not religious is kind of a big deal, especially in a country founded on the Protestant religion. And how much of that comes from former Catholics? Well, that's kind of what we talked about on the 4th of July. Because the 4th of July, it was me and someone. I met him from. I didn't know him before the 4th of July. I met him on the 4th of July, and it was through one of my wife's friends. And so they came over with their kids, and we had a conversation. And so a lot of this conversation got me thinking afterwards about how how religious affiliation does in fact matter and how it influences our practice as Catholics. And so the fact that we have, for example, 28% not affiliated, I'm going to associate that with as atheism for the time being, because 28% of a population, about 1 in 4, not practicing any ritual associated with a known religion. So I still hold that they have a religion. It's just it's a subjectively individual one, but but they do not have one that's associated with a Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox religion, or even like Islam or paganism. So it's a very different thing, and that influence obviously comes from the new atheism movement. So like that started around the early 2000s, but it's getting to a point where it's it's hitting a critical mass of serious influence. And when you look at Catholics, let's just look up. Let's see. Oh, you can't see that. Let me try to present it based off a window, or remove. Sorry, I totally screwed this up. Yeah, stop screen, present, share screen. Sorry, I'm just not used to doing this particular exchange. But so here, this is the study from Kara. As we see, this is weekly mass attendance. So as of right now, we have about 66 million Catholics. Okay, roughly. Okay, give or take a few numbers, but that's about how many Catholics we have in America. And if you notice, the question comes, all right, really, how many practicing Catholics do we have? And you just see this rate go down and down and down. The reason why this is 0 is because for whatever reason in 2020, it wasn't notated, but it was notated in 2022. So just imagine a line going from one to the other. So, so we have clearly a serious problem. So like we have 17.3% of Catholics that practice. What's that come to? So I'll just do that for the sake of, we'll do 66 million times 0.1. Oops. The totally screwed this up live. So 66 million times 0.173 gives us, I'm totally screwing that up. We're going to redo that. Well, we're going to redo that again. Sorry. So the problem is I think it's about 15 million. Let's see. All right, 11 million. So we're talking about 11.5 million people that are Catholic actually practice the faith. And so do you think atheists or people who associate themselves as nuns have an influence to that? Or do you think it's the other way around, where because Catholics aren't practicing, it influences everyone else to be associated as, you know, the 28% that reference themselves as unaffiliated? On top of that, we know that Protestantism is heavy here. So it's a pretty important thing. So like when you look at the percentage of religions in America, this is from Pew Research too. It's from the same study that gave the 28% for the nuns. Evangelical Protestant is 25.4%. Mainline Protestant is 14.7%. Historically Black Protestant, 6.5%. Catholic, 20.8%. And then you get into non-Christian Protestants, Mormons, 1.6%, and then we get Orthodox and other Christians. But clearly, mainline Protestant and evangelical Protestant is a pretty big deal. Okay, it's a pretty big influence, and historically, it was a bigger influence, before the nuns started rising. So how in America, the tradition of Americans who are Catholics seem to be in a pretty bad state. And the reason why I say bad is there's a few reasons. So at the turn of the century, about 1900, there were a lot of immigrants that came in. Okay, a lot of immigrants came in, and they were mostly Catholic. So you had the Polish, the Irish, the Italians, the French, some French, not as much as the founding of when the country's the population was here, like when the French came and went into Detroit, or used to be Detroit, and Michigan and all that stuff. I probably butchered that way of saying it, but it's just, I'm not talking about that period of time. I'm not talking about like 400 years ago. I'm talking about in the early 1900s. There's a bunch of Catholic immigrants that came into America. And so what happened to a lot of them? They assimilated. And what did they assimilate to? They assimilated to a Protestant culture, a Protestant work ethic at times. And it became a serious problem because you ended up seeing a watered down understanding of the faith being taught from one generation to the next. And it would take a variety of forms. So like my family, for example, is Polish. Okay. And that was Catholic. My other side is Irish, and formerly Canadian Anglican, but that's not the example. Like the example that predominantly happened was my my Polish Catholic family came to America, and then over time, the focus on teaching the language of Polish to the kids started getting watered down to the point where it just wasn't going to happen. Now that didn't happen everywhere. Like there are certainly there's a Our Lady of Czestochowa parish here in Detroit, and there's everything's in Polish, and many of the people that go there speak Polish. So it wasn't 100% complete. So please do not take a generalization and try to like counterpoint a generalization with like cherry picked examples. That's the problem here, was that generationally the immigrants, former immigrants, teaching their kids, or I guess descendants of immigrants is really the appropriate. Sorry, the descendants of immigrants teaching their kids moved away from what their family brought here and assimilated more to what the Protestants were. And so on top of that, we have like, if you look at, let's see if I can blow this up. So Baptist family. So you have the Southern Baptist Convention. It's pretty big. It's a pretty big deal. They just recently decided not to agree to the Council of Nicaea. Whether or not that makes them like modern day heretics, I have no idea. Because they rejected like a council 1700 years ago. So I don't know like how that works proactively. Like, because when we think of heretics as Protestants, you have this understanding of, oh, this is like back in the day. They literally just voted on this and they decided not to agree to it. So that's kind of a big deal. I'm not a theologian, so I'm not going to talk about whether or not that is in fact a heresy. Even though I do think it, or whatever. I'm going to cut myself short. I'm going to let like Trent Horn talk about that, because I think that would be an interesting topic about understanding modern heresies in light of outright rejections of councils from the past. But like you have the Baptist family, so the Southern Baptist Convention, Independent Baptist, Missionary Baptist. So you have a lot of people who have a very shallow, and I'm going to say this, a very shallow understanding of the faith. They typically do not follow a tradition that is what we would understand to be like Lutherans, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, and Anglicans. Like those are like what we call high Protestant groups, right? Where they have structure, but they account for a very small group. So we have 4.9, I'm sorry, not non-denominational, Lutherans, 1.5, Presbyterian, 0.8, Pentecostal, 3.6, very small compared to the Baptist family. For at least cumulatively, but like it's a real big issue when that is a like huge influence, because the nature of how they understand the Bible is very subjective, right? Because they follow a sola scriptura understanding, and they promote that. And so when we come into contact with that, when we see movies and videos and shows that correspond to that theology, for the most part, like the last 60, 70 years, maybe longer even, we've kind of just taken it, right? Like, and we've let it influence ourselves, our kids, and it's diluted the faith, because for the most part, we haven't been vigilant in guarding against that. In fact, like I remember when I was in, there was someone from Word on Fire. I don't remember his name, but he had stated, I think it was Vaught, but he had promoted the idea that we should watch all these Christian movies coming out, even though they didn't fit in with Catholic theology. And like, my question is why? Like we are in such a terrible catechesis state that promoting like videos, like movies, entertainment to ourselves that hold a very Protestant understanding, that undermine the several Catholic points within them. Why do we need to promote them? Like, that seems fundamentally a problem. And so because again, you're undermining the very thing you're supposed to be vigilant about, which is the teachings of the church. And so, and so, needless to say, I didn't go see him, but it's but it's one of these things where it's like you really do need to take into account, like, all right, so why as Catholics do we have such a crappy job at understanding hierarchy? Like, why do we as Catholics in America have such a crappy understanding? And I'm not talking just about like those that go to mass or those that don't go to mass weekly. I'm talking about those that do go to mass weekly. Like, why do we have such a terrible understanding of authority? Why do we have such a terrible understanding of cohesiveness in our tradition that, for the most part, just looks Protestant? And it's not just those that are on the left. There's also those that are on the right. And so now it's a matter of like, it's not a liberal or conservative perspective. It's a very Protestant problem that's been influenced in the church. It's not just outright modernity, but like, I mean, there's so many people like with the Vigano thing that just happened, that they're like, oh, like the church is wrong on this, and they vocally go against the church, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. It is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, to vocalize such a censure like that. Because as of right now, like, I'm not trying to get into that specific thing because I don't want to go into the details of it, but it's incredibly dangerous just to vocalize it. And we have the access to, right? We have Twitter, we have other guys that do the same thing that I'm doing. And I'm kind of trying to like put the cap on it in a way or two, but it's this idea of you're promoting a Protestant understanding of Catholicism. Like, I mean, like, that's what sedevacantism gets charged with a lot, right? Like, well, they're just being Protestants, they're rejecting the faith, and they're doing whatever they want to justify their rebellion against the church. Like, that's a common argument people make. So it's not like it doesn't happen in quote unquote conservative angles of the faith or people who claim to be part of the faith. And so, like, that's kind of, again, this is a very big deal, and we kind of just like don't care like to the extent that we should, or don't have the proper nuance, or we throw it under the rug, or you know, memes are okay, I guess, because they bring attention to it. But so I've rambled quite a bit. I just want to like talk, like, I'm sorry, not talk, read what's in the comments, just because the comments are exploding. Specifically chat. So let me see. 1 second. Yep. So I agree with Ireland's comment, James. I think so yeah, I think the influence of the clerical sex abuse scandal can't be ignored, even though some Protestant churches and the Boy Scouts are dealing with the same. Right. So like that, I totally agree with too. So because like that happened at the same time as the New Atheism, and the New Atheism really sunk their teeth into it and used it as kind of like a bashing, specifically against Catholicism, which, as you'll see, let's see, accounts for still 20.8% of the population. And it did for more earlier. And so a lot of nuns now are from that because they have been scandalized. And even now with the Rupnik situation, it's been poorly handled, and it's creating kind of like a second or third phase of that, because frankly, nothing's being done that's effective, or what a lot of people think are just. So that's kind of a big deal. Let's see. They don't have their scandals. Why are they? Right. Because, and you know, that goes back with the understanding that Protestants, by and large, are just so scattered. They're so scattered and all over the place that you can't really put a target on their back like you can with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is a fairly robust structure. And it's very easy just to say, haha, Catholics did that, Catholics did this, Catholics, and thus Catholics are wrong. But it's okay if I'm a non-denominational, or I'm a mainline Protestant, or X, Y, and Z, having the similar things happen. But like, you know, attorney generals aren't being sent in on them, right? Like, so that's kind of a big deal. And if they are, it's like, what is it? That one Baptist group that is like does a lot of hate protests. I don't remember what they're called, but man, like that was like the same thing. That would probably be the closest thing with Protestant groups when it comes to that in terms of modern day, because it used to also be the KKK, right? Like the KKK was also used as a target or a pseudo target for Protestants, because so many of the KKK were Protestants, and that's what they espoused. And so it didn't look well, or I'm sorry, yeah, it didn't look good for Catholics and other Christians, because you had this group that took a lot of, like, if you look at like Spain and other celebrations in Europe, they have Catholic attire on. Like they have like a Catholic get up. Like there's images of this coming out now where I wish I had a picture of it, but like where they have something that you would probably as an American be like, oh man, that looks like the KKK. But it's actually something that's been going on as a festival in particular countries in Europe for hundreds of years. And it's like, it's just a copy paste again from Protestantism, or to Protestantism from Catholics, except obviously the KKK is bad. And so again, like that didn't exactly help either. Let's see. Right. Like they were absolutely, no, I totally understand the whole persecution, and that was an influence to their assimilation. So like that, there's like, when you look at old movies, you would typically see a cop, like in the night, like when I say old movies, I mean like 1930s, 1940s, you would see a cop, and the cop was almost always Irish or black. And the reason why was because you couldn't discriminate based off race for the government. And so those were jobs that the Irish and blacks were able to get, that the persecution was not as bad. It was still there, but it wasn't as bad. And so that, you know, that's one of the reasons why you see that in older movies. So, yep, lose the language, lose the culture, lose the religion tied to the culture, or gather in pockets of people you share those things with and hold on tight. Right. So the reason why the language example was such a big deal with my grandfather not passing on Polish to my dad is because, like, you know, that was a standard thing to do, to lose, to you lost the language. And if you lose the language, you lose the culture, because the language is tied very much to the culture for a lot of these countries, especially like if it's Latin based. Obviously, Polish is Slavic based, but Polish is like an incredibly great, like the history of Poland is crazy, because there was about 150 years where Poland did not exist as a country, but did as a people. And they did because they tied themselves so tightly to the Catholic Church that when the restructuring of countries happened again, they were brought back as a country. So the Polish people have a history of like withstanding a lot of crap and still being Catholic through it. But in a lot of cases in America, the assimilation was overbearing for many. And so and when you lose the culture, you lose the religion tied to the culture, because at the center of that culture, just as I used that example for Poland, like the religion is at the center of that culture, because it's from the religion that the culture grows around. And so again, like that doesn't mean that they're automatically going to become Protestant or atheist, but it is something where you're like letting go of a tie. You're letting go of a string that points them in the direction of tradition and what their ancestors believed, and even to a certain extent how they believed, because how they speak matters. And which is, I think, one of the reasons why in Vatican II, Latin is explicitly stated as having pride of place, or is saying should be, I'm sorry, That's Gregorian chant that says pride and place. Latin says should be preserved, because just like in the Eastern rites, it makes no sense that the Eastern rites would lose their languages, right? And to be consistent with the Eastern rites, the Latin rite shouldn't lose its language. That would be very irregular for that to happen. And unfortunately, that's happened in America for quite a while. Too many. Oh my gosh, Diane, that is like totally true. Because like the understanding of Mary as being a sinner is like huge, just absolutely huge. And it's second to give her this understanding that how her childbirth happened was not in a Catholic way, in a Catholic understanding. I'm not going to go into detail on that, because I think Catholic Answers does a great job showing the church fathers and how to understand that. So I'm going to just point to them because they do a great job at that. And I'm not going to explain that here. So yeah, when he talked about not to get too into details, but when he explicitly stated what a sedevacantist states in regards to Pope Francis, yes, like that's a yes. I agree with it. Like, let's see. I think we need to see more excommunication trials. A lot of public figures out there that have self-excommunicated by action, but continue to present themselves as Catholics in good standing. Not only that, not only are they presented in good standing, they are treated as in good standing, which undermines the whole point of the self-excommunication aspect, right? Like, how can you be outside of the grave sin? If you act out a mortal sin, like, you're outside the church, because you have to, because you're no longer in communion with God, right? So you go to confession to get back into communion, to say sorry for the sins that you've committed and mean it. Like, you can't just say sorry, you actually have to mean it. So anybody who's not familiar with that and watching, like, I'm not just saying it goes underneath, it's not a simple thing. It's not easy. And you have to mean it. And but yeah, like, there was the time that Biden went to the Vatican, and I think received communion there. And like, several bishops had already come out and said, like, he supports abortion, I'm not going to let him receive communion. So that's kind of a big problem, because they do cite the fact that he self-excommunicated. And then on top of that, when you have bishops arguing or saying, well, he did or he didn't, and now you have a clarification problem, and the, I think, inherent problem of self-excommunication, because it's not clear. And so because it's not clear, you have cases where then Joe Biden receives communion in instances, and I'm using him as an example because he is obstinately against the faith, and several bishops have already stated this. You can find them. It's very, like, this is not a hidden secret. I'm not judging based off myself. I am going to what the bishops have stated, including his own cardinal, who has said he seems to pick and choose what he does as a Catholic. And so I'm not doing this by myself. I'm not making this judgment by myself. Bishops have already stated this. And so when you say he's been self-excommunicated, like, the trial really cements it, right? Like, everybody knows Vigano is excommunicated. Everybody. And that's good for two reasons, right? It's good to help Vigano, so because it's a medicinal thing to do. And it's good to let us know, as the lay people, all right, where is crossing the line? Like, what is crossing the line and what we shouldn't do. And I understand that sounds very legalistic, but like, when that's painted, like, the process is painted in Matthew about excommunication. So, it's not like the early church didn't do this, but the church is kind of bigger. So announcements like that are kind of important. All right. So Westboro Baptist Church, which is literally one family. Okay. Yes. Okay, yes. Let's see. They stole the costume and then threw rocks through Catholic windows. Yes, that's KKK. All right. Let's see. The Irish language was lost in my family forever ago, or it was lost even in Ireland. My mother tried to teach me Italian, but it was basic things like how to count to 10. Got it. You and me both. Okay, so like this is like our previous music director, like side story here. Our previous music director, prior to Father Eric. So she was there with Father Eric, but like she was in warming up, and this was in January, so this was after was it in January? I don't know, but like it was, I don't remember exactly the date. My wife's gonna have to tell me later. But she's warming up and she's doing Mary Did You Know on the organ. And I'm just like, what? And so like, why are you doing this? Is like doesn't make any sense at all. So okay, so it's yeah, that's what, and so like that's what I was getting at, was this idea of, so not necessarily the whole comment, but the point about bishops over here saying that he's not in communion, and then the Vatican treating him as if he is in communion. Again, that's where self excommunication seems to break down, is because you then have to communicate, hey, this politician did this and thus is not okay, or that politician did this and that's not okay. I get that you can't excommunicate everybody, right? Like that's, and I don't think that's the point. Now, the point is, like, again, people who are obstinately against the faith and promoting it in a public way, right? Like, so an example of this would also be like, what's their names? Roman Catholic priests of women who are promoting like ordinations for women, and they still claim to be Catholic. I remember in the Diocese of Kalamazoo, what they did was, the Bishop Paul did a great job and came out and formally stated to everybody, on every parish, at a parish level, there was an announcement and said, anybody who goes to this is excommunicated. And so obviously you can't excommunicate every single lay person, like that's a lot of time. But there was that understanding of excommunication put down for that, because it's such a serious offense, right? Like women are trying to act as if they can be ordained. And this goes in line with, again, the religion, like the understanding of Protestants, right? Like, because feminism has hit Protestantism quite hard. That's not to say we haven't been unscathed, but Protestantism has been really influenced by the culture. And that's one of the problems with having a very shallow tradition. Again, I'm not talking about the mainline Protestant groups. I'm talking about the evangelical Protestant groups, to the point where like the rapture came into existence 200 years ago. The once saved, always saved, like all these really kind of ridiculous beliefs that are almost American, like they're just American heresies, and it comes from a very shallow English reading of the Bible and other traditions that is then promoted to people who let's just say, there's not a lot of nice ways to say it, but it's just, it ends up becoming like you leave your brain at the door and you learn whatever the person is telling you, you know, like the pastor's telling you for an hour what you should believe, and you believe it, and it becomes a fundamentalism problem. And we see this in a variety of ways through a lot of different denominations. And it's not that I haven't, like, I don't, it's not that there aren't people who critically think in those groups. The problem is like, God wasn't kidding. Like, I don't think God called us sheep because we were like, that didn't apply. Like, we absolutely do follow people. And there's plenty of reasons why we do follow people the way we do as a group. right? Like, and so if we're going to follow someone, we should follow someone who's standing up for the truth. Like, obviously that's Jesus, but all right, he established a church. We follow that church, right? And so, and this isn't to say we're stupid. It's just to say that's something that we do. Like, not everybody has the time to research extensively how the faith is supposed to be understood to a T. Okay, most of how we understand is supposed to come from homilies and from going to mass and congregating with our churches on a regular basis. It shouldn't be like the way where like there's people like myself and others where we're lay people. I am not a theologian, but like I've read a substantial amount of things just to understand what's going on, to a degree that I think is above my like pay grade, in the sense that I don't need to necessarily know that. And I probably didn't need to go to that level outside of a few like choice circumstances where I needed to answer one question from one guy who didn't even care that I gave him the answer. Right. Like, so it's there's a lot of reasons why like this, the niche focus of us lay people being in Catholicism is kind of odd. Now, that being said, there's a difference between expecting everyone to do it and then individuals just doing it because they want to learn the faith more, they want to love God more, they want to appreciate what God has given us and then apply that in our lives. Okay, that is a different angle, and that's the angle that I do. I do it, but that's not an expectation I should have for every single Catholic person, right? Like, that's just not reasonable given their station in life. But that's where Protestantism looks very alluring, because it's so simple, right? Trust God, say the Jesus prayer, whatever Billy Graham came up with in the 50s or 60s, and then you're saved. You don't need to have baptism. You don't need to, like, people say this, like, and it's terrible. It's incredibly destructive, but it's what's there. And so you have this movement from Catholics who, love God, but are frustrated with things that happen in the hierarchy, and then move to evangelicalism, which pretty shallow. Like, I know a lot of Catholics that have gone from being Catholic to non-denominational because it's simple, and they don't have to deal with all the drama in the Vatican or you know what I mean? Like, but that also brings us back to, okay, well, there's clearly a problem with understanding hierarchy within Catholicism. Like, God established a church with a hierarchy. He didn't just establish an invisible church. Like, there isn't an invisible church. There's a very visible church, and we're just all baptized, right? So it's this understanding of, we're trying to, as Catholics, raise our kids and not have these evangelical influences and not have these atheist influences. And so, for my kids, they don't go to public schools. Why don't they go to public schools? Because they have that would be atheist influence. And before you go on to say, okay, well, Ryan, like, didn't you go to public schools? Yes, I did. I did go to public schools. But you know what? Public schools didn't teach their own religion at that time. They do now. And we just had a whole month devoted to that religion. And I don't want my kids learning that. They'll learn about it someday, depending on their age, but they're not going to learn that religion. And my gosh, if you go to like, what is it? Liberals and TikTok, liberals of TikTok, like that woman that posts those videos, like, man, like it's like a constant stream of like teachers saying they're going to like do exactly what people are concerned about. So it's not like it's out there and it's just a small corner of people doing it. Like, locally, there's actually there's several schools that do that in my area, that I'm very concerned about, because now, like, my kids are going to have to deal with those kids later with their perverted understanding of sexuality. So that'll be fun. That'll be fun as a dad. But okay, so there's the atheist understanding, and then there's the Protestant understanding. Like, someone dies in the family. This actually happened with us. Someone dies in the family, and the first thing those family members will do is they'll try to counsel, like, or comfort my kids that are just not as, like, they're, because of the ages of some of my kids, or the kids at the time, they just weren't old enough to really appreciate what was happening. But in order to comfort them, they'd come up and be like, oh, so-and-so's in heaven, and, he's going to be there with God. And I'd just be like, and like slowly move my kids away, because from there, like, that's a very personal experience that people will have. And they're doing something they're not supposed to do, right? They're judging the soul of that individual for heaven or hell, and they're canonizing them. And so for those family members that have passed, we still pray for them. So, like, every single night, we have a list of people who have passed, and even in the Protestant part of the family, they are prayed for. And I just reinforce in the family, like, no one else in our family is praying for them. Like, quite literally, nobody else is praying for them. And so we have a duty, knowing that, to add them to the list and to sincerely pray for them, if they're in purgatory, to be delivered from purgatory into heaven. So, James, like, that's exactly what happened. Like, the non-denominational pastor came up and was like, oh, I met with him just before a few days before he died, and he told me he knew Jesus, and so I know he's looking down at us from heaven. And I was like, dude, like in the Bible it states Jesus is going to be the one to judge. Like, so you can't do that. Like, you can't do that. And it's like, they take it upon themselves to do this, and so it influences us. And how does it influence us as Catholics? Well, okay, so eulogies, for example. So, practical example of how this applies to us. Eulogies are forbidden expressly within the Catechism and within the Germ. Yet so many priests allow their congregants and family members to do eulogies during Mass. That is a huge no-no. That's not what we're supposed to be like. That's not supposed to be allowed. That is a Protestant influence into a Catholic ritual for the dead, in which we should be praying for the dead person. Hopefully he's alive in Christ, but, like, we're supposed to be praying for him. Like, that's one of the major functions of a funeral Mass. And so, like, the idea that we have a eulogy, and oftentimes what happens in that eulogy, the family member canonizes them, or they say something horrendously inappropriate for the sanctuary because of where the pulpit is. The pulpit's, like, right there, usually next to the altar, but not always. And so, this was done by a Catholic deacon. So, we also had a eulogy at my grandfather's funeral during the non-Mass prayer service. So, I don't actually know the rules for outside of the Mass. It's just in the Mass, that's not supposed to happen. Because in the Mass, you're praying for the dead person. That's one of the intentions of the funeral Mass. Outside of it, like, a eulogy is something where, like, at a wake, it's supposed to happen. Like, that's actually the time that it's supposed to happen, where it's a outside of the Mass, and people are remembering the person who had just passed. And as an Irish, I do have an Irish background. Like, I have a clauda for a wedding band that I do not have on right now, but it's just because you said that you had Irish heritage, and the understanding of the eulogy happening then is like, that's exactly where it should be happening. It should not be happening in the Mass. And so, because again, the Mass is to worship God, and then to pray for the dead, and then to comfort the family. Those are like the three main. And so, yeah, so that's actually not bad if it's done outside of the Mass and at some sort of service, other service. Although I do think that we should get rid of the like luncheon service. I think we should have like a proper wake with like proper appropriate drinking, like and festivities, and prayers and such, because I think we've kind of made it almost like it's a we've made it too casual by just going into the social hall and everybody has Jimmy John's sandwiches, which has happened several times in my life, and it's kind of weird because you would expect someone dying to be a bigger thing based off history. So that was done in place of a Mass. Oh boy. Okay, that's interesting. I'm just gonna say that that's interesting. Sorry, James, I'm not picking on you. You just bring up a lot of good comments. So okay, so and then on top of that, so like what my thumbnail was kind of getting at, with the surprise Pikachu face, was there's this real understanding of when it comes to politics, right? Like when it comes to understanding how we vote as practicing Catholics, that evangelicals will be like, hey, why aren't you voting like us? Or even mainline Protestants, how come you're not voting like us? And it's not just in like the big ticket items, right? Like I'm not talking about voting Democrat or Republican, but like arguing about the issues and properly, right? Like this is like small debates between friends and those that are at work and whatever. And it's like, okay, so like why as a Protestant? So a Protestant will come up and be like, all right, so what's wrong with IVF? Because like I think IVF is great and yada yada yada. And then you're like, okay, well, Catholics, like I'm a Catholic, like IVF is not great. Like there's a lot of problems with IVF, and it's intrinsically wrong because it separates the creative the creative aspect within the sexual union to be outside of the sexual embrace. And so you have this problem of again, IVF is not specifically mentioned in the Bible. And so you have people who again have a shallow understanding of the Bible and of tradition in general, and they're making public policy that affects the nation. Okay. And what is it like? All Republicans, we'll just bring up Republicans because they're considered typically the pro-life party, right? All voted in favor of IVF and passing it. And it's like, no, like that shouldn't happen. That's not being conservative. That's fundamentally not being conservative. That is promoting a very Protestant understanding of the faith. And it's one of the reasons why when you go into pro-life groups, you will typically there will typically be this Catholic and Protestant divide within those groups, where the Protestants will be like, okay, well, what's wrong with contraception? What's wrong with a vasectomy? What's wrong with literally everything stated in Humanae Vitae? And it's just like, well, you get the culture we live in today that was predicted in Humanae Vitae like 60 years ago. And so now you like they're just surprised when you bring this up. Like if they've never heard it before, it's absolutely it is a surprise. I've seen a surprise Pikachu face on people, okay, when talking about those issues in those groups that they thought were safe, right? Because they think you're safe. Or another thing would be like atheists. What is it? Atheists and Catholics, especially like that happens for a different reason. And that mostly happens because a lot of atheists are former Catholics. A lot of nuns are former Catholics. And they have kind of like this libertarian understanding of the faith. In fact, 1 second, I got to see if I that vote happened. Yes. Okay. 69%. Great. I'm going to end that poll. Sorry, I just took the poll. So thank you. I'm going to be talking about libertarianism for a second. So libertarianism. So, and I do know what I'm talking about. I have a whole degree in public policy and public administration. So like, it's not like it's it's out of my realm or whatever. But there's a real problem with libertarianism because you'll have atheists who are libertarians look at Catholics who are libertarians, and they'll use that word specifically. They'll use libertarian, and then that libertarian Catholic will be like, "Yeah, I'm against abortion, and we should vote against it." And then the atheist goes, "Surprise Pikachu face." He goes like, "Wait a minute, I thought you were libertarian." And then the Catholic actually will specify the type of libertarian it is, which is not a pure form of libertarianism like the atheist practices. It's a like very like sectioned off understanding of libertarianism, because in order to be a practicing Catholic, like you cannot be full-blown libertarianism. Like you can't. You have to protect society at like there has to be regulations at certain points that the church has specified in certain spheres. Like, so for example, abortion, I think is the most straightforward example that I'm going to use. But like so like you have this example, or you have this playing out on both sides. And so you have this, what is it? You have this play on, historically, there's been a lot of influence with Catholics. You have a lot of modern day influence from Catholics, but then you also, or to Catholics, but then you also have the history of the interactions between evangelicals and Protestants in general with Catholics, mostly siding with, like, again, the pro-life issues, but then you have this divergence within the pro-life issue, or you have a divergence in like with atheists and libertarianism. And so that's kind of what I wanted to bring out today. And I've been trying to lead it up. I may have gone too heavy on the history at the beginning, but it's just this understanding that there's expectations of us from Protestants and atheists in ways that make no sense given our worldview, but not theirs. And a real shame has come, like, as stated earlier, a real shame has happened where we have lost as Catholics, a lot of us, even the practicing ones, a loss of hierarchy, a loss of authority, a loss of obedience, of being okay with what comes down from the Vatican, and not immediately responding with the most uncharitable take from the Vatican or from our bishops or from the USCCB. And I'm not trying to like, I'm not shilling for the USCCB. I'm not trying to like pull, I'm not trying to pope-splain for the bishops, I guess. What I'm trying to get at, though, is that there is an understanding within our tradition that has always been there, that is ignored by the right and the left, by practicing and non-practicing, that is specific to Americans because of how we focus so much on individualism, and how that fundamentally comes from a Protestant understanding of the faith, which is not what we believe. And so we don't believe every single person is equivalent in the eyes of God with the authority, with the same authority. Obviously we don't. We have priests, we have bishops, and we have a pope. But the pastor at a lot of evangelical Protestant parishes, he has just as much authority as those that are sitting down, according to their perspective. And a lot of that has kind of has come into our realm in a bad way, because we think that we're the individualism of America that is promoted in America based off Protestant understanding has seeped into it. among other things. So sorry, I'm also trying to read the comments, so that last sentence kind of went back and forth for a second. All these souls with nobody praying for them because they're sure they're in heaven already, so there's nothing to pray for. Yeah, and like that's absolutely true. But then there's also the understanding that Protestants, by and large, don't believe in purgatory, and they don't believe in, like, I mean, even the Orthodox believe in understanding of praying for someone after they're dead. So and we're like very much sister churches, right? Like we acknowledge that they have the sacraments. They're just in schism with us, right? Not to say that that's a small thing. It's just Protestants go further than that, and they have completely different doctrine. So yeah, like unfortunately, a lot of them just have they don't even grasp purgatory because, well, one, they're missing a few books, right? And then two, they're missing tradition as well. That's the Protestant influence. They don't tend to drink, and certainly not at anything church related. Oh my gosh, that's totally right. So like the reason why we don't have wakes and like nice like, when I say wakes, I mean like Irish wakes where everyone has like a beer or some sort of like good whiskey or scotch or something, and like we're talking about the person who had died, and we're all enjoying the memories we're all sharing about them, and at the same time doing a vigil or praying for them. So that is what that is. So just to let my wife know, that is what I want at mine. I would like a wake, a proper wake, and there's going to be a part in the funeral what is it, the funeral fund to have such a thing happen, so people don't need to bring their own drinks or whatever. So the people who run the Libertarian Party and the Mrs. Caucus is largely pro-life, which is a development that gives me hope. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely aspects of it that look good, but Andy, but there's also like, did you see their candidate that they're running? Like, and that's like also part of the problem. So like, just to get into politics just a little bit, like even with Republicans, like they're basically Democrats from 15 years ago. They do not have a good understanding of what conservatism is. They don't properly like they have been divorced from ideas such as the principle of subsidiarity, of retaining, like, because like the whole idea of tradition, right, is to build upon what we have passed down and what has stood the test of time. It's very much like an organic way of doing a scientific method, except you're dealing with morals and virtues and all that fun stuff to promote good societies. But like the problem comes when you start tearing down the fences willy-nilly, or you're saying like you're not going to listen to them anymore because you don't feel like it. And that has unfortunately happened in America, where over the past 200 years, we've gone from like our understanding of freedom is mixed, because this was before, like we started before the French Revolution. The French Revolution, if my crap, I hope my connection, I hope I'm coming through. I hope I'm coming through properly. It's giving me a warning that I'm not. But our understanding of freedom is a mix. There's licentiousness. It's the freedom to do whatever I literally can do as long as I'm not letting other people suffer or something like that. And then the other one is the freedom to do what you ought. And both were argued at the very beginning. For example, Alexander Hamilton argued from the standpoint of freedom to do what you ought to do, not the freedom to do whatever you want to do. And so both of those are very different, and both of those have, unfortunately, precedent in this country. And because of that, the because both of them have been there, the licentiousness, the understanding of freedom, the freedom to do whatever I can do as long as it doesn't hurt someone else, has been promoted. And because it's it's like a looser doctrine of freedom, and so it is, and it's more appealing to anybody who has a vice, which is literally everybody. So you'd have to have a very diligent, vigilant group of people to move against that and promote the freedom that we do, to do what we ought to do, as opposed to the freedom to do whatever we can do that doesn't harm another person. All right, the stream is coming on fine. All right, good. Thank you, Lex. I appreciate that. Just because I'm getting like this little warning in the corner, and it's going like like the little satellite thing, and it's like only the small part is coming through. So yeah, I mean, like I wouldn't be surprised about that. Just to move it out of the way, like for example, because a lot of third parties could poll people, and that's one of the reasons why RFK Jr. is not being pushed, because then the Democrats are more likely to lose votes to him, which in certain states could become a problem. Yeah. So, so that's by and large what I wanted to get through. It just, having spoken with the guy I spoke with, I'm not saying his name because I don't know if he wants me to say his name, but speaking with him on the 4th of July really got me reflecting about how we just lack a good discourse within Catholicism and you see this all the time. Like, you literally see this all the time. You see like people that have podcasts like mine that are bigger. Obviously, I'm not a huge podcaster in terms of total count. Again, I appreciate everyone who's followed me and listened to me. I don't want to make it look like I'm taking that for granted. I don't. I appreciate it greatly. But with the other podcasters, there's a lot of infighting that happens, right? Like there's a lot of infighting, and part of that is because and I think, who said this? I don't even remember who said this. When the fathers aren't enforcing, when the father isn't enforcing what he should, the children will wrestle amongst themselves. And I think we've seen that quite a bit. And I'm not even just, I'm not saying from a standpoint of Pope Francis. Well, okay. I'm not just saying that from a standpoint of Pope Francis. Okay. That's for the bishops as well, because there are several bishops that have not gone to the point of actually clarifying or doing what they need to do. Like when you have like there are levels with the Pope, like for example, the German bishops not being disciplined by the Pope because they're promoting like a lot of things that they shouldn't be promoting. Like that's a problem. Or the bishops coming in and bringing in those that are promoting heresy or sedevacantism or a number of other things. And this goes with what I had previously stated about bishops. What is it? The Cardinal Zen example with Michael Lofton, where that specific case was more or less just, I'm not going to go into the details of that, and because it wasn't a proper rebuttal. But it was the idea of a cardinal or bishop is using his authority and his awareness to say, hey, don't do this. You shouldn't do this. Like, he is giving advice. He's making sure we don't waste time. And funny enough, I actually had my first fanboy, and I put this on Twitter. I had my first fanboy response from someone in the comments section. And I never had that before, because I got critical of Michael Lofton. Well, it's not even I got critical from Michael Lofton in so much as I just revealed what happened. And the person was basically explaining that I should have given the entire biography of this man on YouTube and not just the cliff notes. And that even though it wasn't the main focus of the conversation, that I should have just gone to every excruciating detail to explain the situation, to give him the most, in his words, proper light. And it's like, I'm not going to do that. I can just give a summary. I don't need to go that far to explain what happened. And so, oh my gosh, Rosie. Hey, oh my gosh. All right, cool. Nice. I'm really excited to see you. So, Rosie Gamgee. So I'm just going to point her out. Rosie Gamgee, if you don't follow her on Twitter, you're doing something wrong. And because her tweets are hilarious and they brighten a lot of people's days, including mine. So make sure you follow her on Twitter. It is her name, at Rosie Gamgee. So I know she wasn't expecting that, but I'm just very happy to see her here. So okay, so Pope Francis sent Cardinal Fernandez to discipline the German bishops, and he warned them that they're going to get excommunicated if they keep up the nonsense. Maybe that message should be louder. Absolutely, that message should be louder. Oh my gosh. But like, okay, so like the problem, so the reason why I bring that up is because Cardinal Fernandez is pretty recent appointment, right? Like he wasn't there a year ago. And a year ago, it had been like 4 or 5 years with, or more than that, where the bishops are just outright doing things they shouldn't be doing. And so like the fact that it was taking so long to discipline them is kind of an issue. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like, whereas like, for example, if okay, what's a good example? I guess the one that's coming to mind is when Cardinal Sarah was like, hey, like, it would be great if everyone went ad orientem, to refocus on the Eucharist as the focus for the Mass and the source and summit. And the next day, Pope Francis came out with a correction. And so I get it. Like there has to be more politics involved, because you're talking about like a whole conference of bishops that have a lot of money, and then also have seemingly a lot of sway. So it's I understand the delicate matter of that. It's just a matter of the rest of us that don't know what's going on, and like you said, probably should be louder. Sometimes it just looks like it takes a very long time for very obvious corrections. It's kind of like if you notice your kid is like in the store hitting like all of the groceries down on the ground, and then at the end, like after 20 minutes of him knocking over like several aisles worth of food, you go and get him like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. Like you're going to get in trouble if you keep doing this. It's like, okay, but like you still have all of the like food on the ground. And in this case, it's, you have like a lot of the population being influenced by those policies and what the church, like the scandal the German bishops have promoted. So I get what you're saying, Andy, and I didn't know he did that, so I do appreciate you pointing that out. And so, yeah, so there's derailment happens often, and that's okay, because this is meant to be casual. This is meant to be like this is meant to be conversational to the best that I can. Obviously, I don't have like a co-host or something like Avoiding Babylon to like bounce ideas back off of, but it's supposed to be very, very much a back and forth with the chat, because I don't like the idea of me just rambling for like the whole, what was it, an hour and 10 minutes. And so having feedback like that, or I'm sorry, you said hi, so it's not feedback, but I appreciate you saying hi. But it's, yeah, so Cardinal Syrup, excuse me, would be such a great pope. I think he would be too. Yes, I think he would be too. Catholicism and chill. Yeah, I mean that's basically what I go for. I don't go to make this like a super like uptight production. I do I present information, and you should be able to see where these like, this is from the Pew Research. This was done at the beginning of this year, so like all this data is fairly up to date. I try to give as much information as possible without making it overbearing, because as a statistician, it's like, professionally, like, that's my job, is I have to take things that are very technical, even if it's just like this, and bring it to a very easy place, because if you don't, there's going to be people who miss it, and there's a lot of these statistics should be known by more people, because our understanding of evangelizing has been so crippled, because we don't know how our neighbor actually practices, and that happens for a variety of reasons, whether we're just doing everything online, or we're ignoring people who aren't our own religion. There's a lot of problems with the evangelization efforts in America, and part of that has to do with simply knowing what your neighbors are, and really how we're to deal with that. And so that comes with that obviously goes into apologetics, but this isn't a apologetics channel, so I'm not going to go into that. For those that don't know, I tend to only do apologetics with someone on screen that is also a theologian. So like, typically that's with my priest. He'll come on and we'll have a discussion, and if I say something wrong, he corrects me like right there. And so that way I'm not giving just simply my opinion. I'm giving the opinion of both myself and my priest to better help everybody. And so I'm very aware of at Day of Judgment, I'm going to be held accountable for having a channel like this that goes to people and being influenced and influencing factors to some people. And I definitely don't want to be held against me that I said something wrong, or said something in ill will against another person, which is why I tend to have a more measured approach, even to other people, other podcasters that have most people, have a negative view of. So, no jokes are illegal, no fun allowed. I mean, that's okay, Rosie. All right. So I guess does anybody have a question, or like, if they want to go into any of this stuff that I've got up? I know it's kind of like, that's a bit odd of me, because I don't typically do that. But given I have all this up, and I can deep dive into a few of these things. If you have questions, like, I'll wait a few seconds and see if you guys have any, and then if not, then I'll just end the stream. Okay, so it doesn't look like anybody's asking any questions. So that's fine. So regardless, I appreciate you guys. What do you mean, why? Why what? I don't know. What? All right, so like, basically I've been I'm not going to rehash everything, but basically about the influences of Protestantism on Catholicism, and the influences of atheism the influences of atheism on Catholicism, and how that historically has taken place. For example, there's been the assimilation of the Catholic populations, of the Catholic immigrants, to be Protestants and Protestant oriented, and then you have the assimilation of atheism now, especially in public schools, with which is a natural result, I would argue, is a natural result of Protestantism, because of the shallow understanding of the Bible and what it tends to lead to, which is a secular order or atheistic order. And when that happens, and I'm adding a few more things that I didn't quite go into, but when that happens, you have a state that promotes a secular understanding. And when that happens, that secular state promotes atheism. And so it becomes a cycle. of what happens and how we as Catholics need to be vigilant in light of all those things, especially when it comes to media. Something I did not say, and this is something I'm going to add, but if you guys watch Daily Wire, so if you notice, so I use Daily Wire's Jeremy's razor. Okay, like I actually really like Jeremy's razor because it works on my beard and my neck in a way that others simply don't, and I will not support Gillette because of the route they ended up taking. And so um, I bought Jeremy's razor when that happened. But if you notice, Jeremy's razor, their advertisements deal with scantily clad women. And this just goes to point to more of a Protestant understanding, right? Because it's led by a Protestant, Jeremy Boring, and he's in the commercial, he has two women who are very loosely clothed, and it's really inappropriate. He also calls himself God King, which I think fundamentally is an issue, even if it is just as a joke. And when you sell yourself as a conservative promoting that, it becomes again like you're like a Democrat from so many years ago. And the reason why I'm saying that is because being conservative, like modesty is a huge component of that. And it's not just women, but men also. And so modesty, humility, like this understanding of appropriate attire, even if you're promoting something to bash another country or company, because that company is selling to is placating something that is fundamentally disordered, which Gillette was promoting. And this again, like you got to be careful of the media you promote and you consume, because that media will consume you. And which goes back to another video I did, because these are a lot of problems that we have as Americans, is we have all these different distractions, all these things. Like it's great. We have a lot of freedom to get above our station in life, right? Like we can go from being a family of let's just say janitors, and a kid can go from being a janitor, like the son of a janitor, to being the CEO of a company. Okay, like that's great. The problem is the morals. The problem is how there's a lot of shallow understanding that's promoted in terms of even basic concepts in the culture. And modesty is one of them. That's one of the reasons why, for example, Calendargate became a problem. If you guys know what happened with Calendargate was this thing on Twitter where a bunch of conservative women dressed provocatively and almost fed it like in a fetish, where and it was promoted by, I think it was like Conservative Man or whatever. Like, I mean, they were definitely targeting conservatives, but it was a Protestant or atheist understanding. So it wasn't, I don't want to completely say it's just Protestant, but Protestant or atheist understanding. Even with the one where it had like the cross in the background. Like there was one where it had the cross in the background. The woman looked like a traditional housewife. And it was just like really off-putting, because the rest of the calendars, like calendar pictures, were like clearly sexualizing these women in an objectifying way. And so again, it's like the idea of conservatism, like true conservatism as like Catholics would understand it, is not being shown in the market to a way in a way that is helpful. And so like that's my grand summary. It's not the greatest summary because I did miss some stuff at the beginning, but so I appreciate you being here, Andy. So why is a very important question. What do you think of Catholic schools then? Depends on the school, of course, but what do you think overall? So my kids go to Catholic school. My wife and I both looked at the schools before they went in. So I am totally that parent that gets on everybody's butt when something happens. And I'm very glad we have a principal that enforces Catholic doctrine. So that's how I stand. Like, I'm not going to say Catholic schools are amazing. They're not. Okay. Like, more often than not, you're going to have a very watered down version of the faith. The faith is going to be promoted in the most minimal way. And we need to change that. And like, we need to change that for a variety of reasons, right? Because our culture is pushing something. It's pushing its own religion. The religion that we just, the culture celebrated last month. And it's trying to had to go. Okay. So, but like, that's, I hope you come back and watch this. Sorry, she just said she had to go. But it's like this understanding of, yeah, so like Catholic schools by and large. I just did a video on the retention rate of Catholics that go to Catholic schools, and it's horrible. Like 36% of Catholics that go to school do not stay Catholic. I'm sorry, 36% stay as a practicing Catholic in adulthood. That number should be targeted more towards 50%. And even though it's more than the public schools, who cares? Like, you have 8 hours a day with these kids, teaching them the faith, as part of the curriculum. That number should be higher. And so yeah, so Catholic schools, again, they're a mixed bag. The one recommendation I would give for Catholic schools is to look into it specifically if you're going to put them in there. Now, would I want kids to go into a Catholic school as opposed to a Catholic school as opposed to a public school? More often than not, yes. Because of what the public schools are promoting. And so that just goes back to the whole celebration month. What would be terrible is if you had a Catholic school that promoted that crap too at the Catholic school, because now you're giving a scandalous understanding of the religion and what the religion promotes. Like, there's no reason we should be celebrating one of the sins that cries out to heaven. That makes no sense whatsoever for a Catholic school to do. And I'm sorry if you don't understand what a flag means. It doesn't mean that you're like, oh, we want them to be inclusive and or whatever. No, flags are a symbol of dominance. Okay, like, they're a symbol of dominance, and so you should not. A Catholic school should not have a flag of something that runs contrary to the Catholic school. I mean, it's simple as that. So, all right. So I don't see any other questions, but I do appreciate everyone coming to visit me and listen to this this explanation, this thing I reflected on from a conversation I had on the 4th of July. Admittedly, I've thought about it in other ways, but that conversation I had on the 4th of July was a very good conversation, and it did bring about a lot of reflection on our state with our state of the country and how Catholics fit in. Jeremy Boring did say that historically, like, Catholics weren't part of the country, and man, I kind of want to bring that up now. Let's see if I can. Well, no, I'm not gonna. But basically, this idea of if we want the country back to how it was, it can't be a Catholic country. And it's like, you know what? I don't want the country back to where it was. I want the Catholic American United States. I want the Catholic renewed United States, and not what it was, because what it was will inevitably come back to what the Protestants dropped the ball on, which is allowing liberalism to spread and promote fundamentally what atheism is now. So, but that's a whole other thing. Like, I'm not going to go into that much. But all right, Andy, last thing. So I'm very blessed to go to I'm very I was very blessed to go to excellent Catholic schools. What I learned in Catholic high school helped me convert my wife. Oh, okay, that's great. That's a great thing. Yeah, that's a great thing to end on, actually. So, if you just started watching, I'm sorry. This is recorded, so you can watch it again. But thank you for joining me tonight on your Saturday, and I hope tomorrow you have a great Sunday. And I don't remember which Sunday it is, but I hope your Mass is enlightening and helps you with infusing yourself to God. So have a great night and have a great week.